Shila, right?
Yeah.
Okay, we are on page Yud Aleph Amud Aleph, 11a in the Hebrew side, and in the if you're following in the art scroll, we are on 11a2. First, I just want to say before we start, this is commitment. Commitment is when I can't be here because I was in Deal and in Lakewood giving classes all day and all night last night, and you have to shift the class to another night. The people are yeah, of course. They figure it out, they make it happen. Look at this. It's amazing. Fantastic. Baruch Hashem. Okay. Let's go. The Gemara says as follows. We're in the middle of discussing this idea of the fact that a person's deeds are transcribed. Just like there's a court stenographer, there's a world stenographer. But you just have to identify where it is. And the Gemara actually looks for the source of this stenographical origin. The Bereb Shila Amri. In the yeshiva, in the place, in the study halls of Rabbi Shila, they used to teach. The two angels that follow a person wherever he goes, they are the ones that give testimony against him. For Hashem commands His angels with you. Now, the strange part of this is that those angels are not negative angels; they're positive angels. Because if you look at the end of the pasuk, what's the end of the pasuk? Hashem sends His angels to guard you in all of your way. So what does it mean? Why would we be saying over here that these angels are testifying against you for the deeds that you are doing? Okay? What's the reason? How could we say that? So I have two understandings on how to understand this Gemara. Both of them are my own. I don't yet have a source for them. But let me share with you the two ideas. Source number one. The idea is, Hashem is sending the angels to be with you, to guard you on your way. But the same angels that are there to guard you, they also are there. So they are de facto witnesses, even though their purpose of being sent was for your benefit. It's kind of like if someone sends police officers to your home to guard you. And in your house, you have a counterfeit thing and you're printing money. Even though they were sent for protection, but then they witnessed the crime. So that's the simple answer to why Bereb Shila is bringing this pasuk to make this point. The second point, I would say, is that the word... Yes, go ahead.
Aren't they coming... We learned that the angels are coming to the person who doesn't suffer with the community. So they're coming to the person who was doing bad.
That was a separate issue. That's
a different
issue. Over there, we're talking about someone who parties when the community is suffering.
Got it.
Here we have a different point. Here is just in general, when a person does a sin, the angels are bearing witness against them in Shamayim as to what happened. Now the question obviously is, what do you mean? But it says over here that their purpose is to guard you. The other element that I thought perhaps is an answer to this is that the word lishmorecha means to guard you, no question. But the word lishmorcha also is used in another context. In Shema we say, hishamer lecha. What does hishamer lecha mean? Watch out. The implication of hishamer lecha, right? Protect yourself, watch out, right? Is coming to communicate that if you don't watch out, you're going to get punished. So the word lishmorcha, which in the question I was asking, seems to be for your protection, it means to watch you. But watching you could mean either positive or negative. And therefore, Rabbi Shila learns from this idea that the angels themselves, they bear testimony against him if he does something wrong. Rabbi Chitka teaches, Nishmato shel Adam, hi me'ida alav. It's your own soul that rats you out. Could you believe that? And how does he prove it? Because the pasuk says, "Mishochevet chekecha," from that which lives within. Chekecha usually means your lap. It sits right, close to you. Shemor petchei picha, guard the openings of your mouth. You can't. In other words, the idea in its simple form was it was telling you at the time, make sure you watch what you say because you can't trust anybody. Anyone that hears what you say is going to go and blab it to someone else. Okay. So the pasuk over here is telling you not just that the person that sits on your lap, i.e., the one that's close to you, your children, your wife, your family, but rather mishochevet chekecha, that which sits inside of you. So even your own soul is going to is going to say over that which was said that was not appropriate. Let's say lashon hara, nivul peh. So we're learning that the person's own neshama bears testimony against him. Yesh omrim, and some people say evarav shel adam me'idim bo. The limbs of a person are what testify against him in Shammai. Shnei Amar, as it says, atem edai ne'um Hashem. You are plural, are my witnesses. So says HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which means that God is saying the mass amounts of a person's own limbs are what bear testimony against him and say this person was deficient in doing this, in doing this, in doing this, in doing this. Now, what's interesting to me about this as well, aside from just the simple element of atem edai, is the idea that's put forward by the Vilna Gaon. The Vilna Gaon says that a person has a physical, earthly body, but also has a celestial body, a spiritual body. So it's not just that you have a soul and a body, and the soul is spiritual and the body is physical, but rather also there is a physical, the form of a body, it also exists in Shamayim. It's just of a spiritual nature, which actually makes a lot of sense, because we know that our rabbis tell us that there are 248 mitzvot aseh, positive commandments, 365 mitzvot lo ta'aseh, negative commandments. The 248 akeneged represent the 248 limbs, pieces, parts of a human body, and the 365 represent the elements that draw it together, the sinews, the veins, etc., the tendons, all the pieces that hold all those pieces together. Now, what's fascinating to me is that, according to that, the Vilna Gaon explains what does it mean when it says that the evarim shel adam me'aidim bo, that the limbs of a person, they give testimony against him. He says that if you were wise enough, you might know which of the 248 limbs corresponds to which of the 248 mitzvot. And the great tzaddikim were able to see a person who had an issue in one area of his life, and they would say to them, the reason why you're sick here, why you have a problem here, why you have an issue here, is because of this specific mitzvah. Go refine, don't do teshuvah in this specific area. Conversely, what that means, according to the Vilna Gaon, is that when a person gets to Shamayim, no one's going to have to say anything. You're going to be missing your left pinky, and in Shamayim they're going to be like, okay, Shiluach HaKan, screwed up that one, right? They're going to know it straight away. The testimony of the limbs will be not in their spewing forth the vitriol against you, but rather in the absence or in the weakness of that actual limb, which is a fascinating understanding of the Gemara that we just read. Okay, we continue. The Gemara says, El Emunah. God is a God of faith. Kishem shenifraim min harashaim. Ve'en avel. El Emunah ve'en avel. God is a God of faith, ve'en avel, and there is no twisting of justice. There's no perversion of justice. The Braita then explains, so what does that mean? El emunah ve'en avel. El emunah kishem shenifraim min harashaim la'olam haba. Just like in the world to come, someone who's a rasha gets punished, afilu al avera kala she'osim, even on a small sin that they do. Okay, kach nifraim min hatzadikim ba'olam hazeh al avera kala she'osim. So too, if God is a God of justice, in Avil, there's no perversion of justice. So everything is straight, everything is on the up and up. Yeah. So the same way a Rasha gets judged for the tiniest infraction in the world to come, so too does a Sadiq get judged for the tiniest infraction, but he gets judged for that infraction in this world. We then continue. Ve'en Avil. So what does it mean, Ve'en Avil? Kishem shemishalmim sachar lesadikim leolam haba. Just like the Sadiqim get reward in the world to come, afilu al mitzvah kala she'osim, on the tiny mitzvah that they do, kach mishalmim sachar lerasha ba'olam hazeh afilu al mitzvah kala she'osim. So too, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who is a just God, in Avil, there's no perversion of that justice. What that means is that someone who has, if a Sadiq gets rewarded on high for the tiniest mitzvah, has to be that a Rasha who's going to get rewarded for his mitzvah in this world is also getting his reward for the tiniest mitzvah that he did. And we have many examples of that throughout history where a Rasha was rewarded for some tiny deed that he did with unbelievable sachar in this world in order that he should not get the eternal reward in Olam Haba.
just so I can understand, he gets the Rashad gets rewarded in this world, and that takes away his beracha in the Olam Haba?
In the world to come, exactly. And that's where we actually say it in the Pasuk. We say, Ishbar lo yedar chesilo yavin etzot, every Friday night, right? A person who doesn't understand the ways of God, chesilo yavin etzot, befroach reshaim ade'aser, how the wicked, they flourish like grass, crabgrass. You don't have to water it, you don't have to plant it. It just grows by itself. It grows like wildfire. Befroach reshaim ade'aser, right? Why are they growing so much? Lehishamedam ade'ad. In order that ade'ad, forever and ever, their destruction should be complete. God does not need to pay them in the world to come. However, when it comes to a tzaddik, God's intention is to go the other way. So therefore, in order to have the reward, which is eternal, in Olam Haba, HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants to clean even the tiniest element down here that's incorrect, so they don't have to live with that forever and ever in the world to come. The Braita continues, Tzaddik v'yashar, who God is a tzaddik, he is just, v'yashar, and he's straight, and therefore there cannot be a differentiation made between a tzaddik and a rasha. Everyone's good deeds need to be noticed even in their minute form, and everyone's bad deeds also need to be noticed even in their minute form. The only question is, where will the person get their comeuppance? The Gemara continues. Amru, the Gemara says, B'sha'at p'tirato shel adam lebet olamo, when a person passes away and goes to the next world, lebet olamo, to the house of his world, kol ma'asav niftarim mimenu, all of his deeds, everything he's ever done, disappears. It goes away from him. Ve'omrim lo, and they say to him, Kach v'kach asita b'makom ploni b'yom ploni. So and so did you do in this place at this time. Okay? Ve'hu omer, he says yes. Ve'omrim lo chatom, and they tell him, okay, he's forced to say yes because the deeds themselves, they know what he's done. What does he do? Omrim lo chatom, they say sign on it. He signs on it. Shneimar, like it says in the pasuk, biyad kol adam yachtom, in this book of God's accounting of deeds, every person's signature is there. And who signs off on the deeds that you did or didn't do? You sign off yourself on it. Below od, not only that, elashem matzdik alav et hadin. The person, not only does he sign that this is what he's done, the person actually says it's correct that such and such a punishment should be given to me, or such and such a reward should be given to me on that which I did. Ve'omer lahem, and he says to them, Yafeh dantuni, it's good, the way you judged me and the punishment you're giving, you did a great job, Your Honor, fantastic. On that lifetime sentence to Gehinnam, amazing what you did there. Solitary confinement, no clean clothes, it's exactly what I deserve. Amazing. L'kayem ma shene'amar, to fulfill that which says in the pasuk, leman tisdak b'dvarecha, in order that you should be justified b'dvarecha, in your words. Tzdak is not that you're justified for your own self, but it means that other people also justify you. So God's justice in the world to come is exact on even the tiniest thing, positive or negative, but at the same time, it's also something about which you can't hire a lawyer in the heavenly court. Because could you imagine, you get Morris Mystery, he's prepared a book like this big, to be able to get you out of it, and then God produces a document that has your own signature on it. And not only that, underneath it, it says, and I certify that this punishment, I agree, is the right punishment.
But this is a little far-fetched.
What do you mean? Go ahead.
We're human beings.
Yeah.
We're going to admit all of our faults.
Excellent question. Them, how can it be?
Not only admit, sign, certify, seal, delivered.
How is that possible? The answer is, you are no longer a human being at this point. This is at the time when the person...
Why do we need to sign?
Sorry?
Then why do you need to sign?
So that in Shamayim, it's not God imposing His will on you, but rather the Neshama itself saying, this is what I deserve. This is what I've done.
Is there any teshuvah in Olam Haba?
No, zero teshuvah. The concept of teshuvah is only when you have free will.
Oh, so
now you're in the world. You see what you did. There's no desire anymore. There's no ego anymore. So now you want to do teshuvah? Azaku baruch. Doesn't work. Right? The only element that you have in Olam Haba is the cleansing power, whether the cleansing power of Gehinam or the things that the person left behind in this world that are constantly accruing sachar for him. And that's why I always say that people have to spend their tzedakah wisely. They need to ensure that the tzedakah went to the right causes. They need to make sure that the efforts that they're putting in to leave a legacy behind is a legacy that's going to pay dividends forever and ever. Because people think, I'm not going to live forever. Yeah, you are. Just not in this form. What's your retirement plan, Rohi? Gotcha? Okay. Let's move on. The Gemara continues. The Gemara says as follows. So if you remember, we are now going to go back to the discussion that we had earlier on. We had a discussion earlier on when we talked about the case when it doesn't rain and the people of the generation who are fasting in order to achieve and doing teshuvah on behalf of the people in order to bring the rain. Okay?
Can I ask you a question?
Yes, sure.
Where's the Maharsha on this?
Maharsha is in the back of the Gemara,
Okay.
but it's not in the back of this Gemara because this Gemara is a Gemara that's built with translation. But in every Gemara, the Maharsha would be in the back. It follows almost always. You have the beginnings of the Gemara brings the beginnings of the back of the Gemara has certain commentators. First the top line Rosh, and then you have at the bottom commentaries on the Rosh. But after you turn past that, you'll see Chidushei Agadot, Chidushei Halachot Agadot Shel Maharsha, and that's where the Maharsha kind of comes in. Very deep thinker.
Is there Tosfot here?
Yes, this is Tosafot over here.
This one.
Yeah.
This column. Left
Okay.
side. Okay.
Yeah. All right. Let's carry on. So the Gemara says as follows. Amar Shemuel. Shemuel teaches, Kol hayoshev b'ta'anit nikra hoteh. Person who fasts is called hoteh, sinner. I don't know what this means for us intermittent fasters. The Gemara carries on, and the Gemara says, Savar ki hay Tana. Shemuel holds, according to the opinion of Tana, of the generation before him, Detanya, because it says in the Braita, Rabbi Elazar HaKapar Rabbi Omer. Rabbi Elazar HaKapar, he taught that Mal Talmud Lomar v'chiper alav, where the pasuk says that a person who's a nazir has to get a kapara on himself, ma'asher chata ala nefesh, from the fact that he made a sin on his soul. What chet, what avon did the nazir do?
He didn't enjoy what Hashem...
Excellent. What sin did he do against the nefesh? All he did was become a nazir. Background. What does it mean that he became a nazir? Back in the time of the Gemara, that was before the Gemara, that was a fairly common thing where a person wanted to become a Nazirite. What would they say? I'm a nazir. Let's say if you just said I'm a nazir, stam nazir, 30 days. It means you would take 30 days and you would detox. You'd grow your hair, you're not allowed to cut your hair. You're not allowed to come into contact with a dead body. Okay? You're not allowed to drink wine. So it was a purification process that people went through when they felt like they needed to reconvene, and reconnect with their spirituality. And at the end of that process, they would have to bring a korban. The Gemara said, the pasuk says that one of the korbanot that Nazir brings is a korban hatat. And the question is, why does he need to bring a korban for doing a sin? He didn't do a sin. And the Gemara answers, he did do a sin. What sin did he do? He deprived himself of wine. Who told you that you should deprive yourself of one of the great things that God put in this world? This idea that we torture, you're torturing yourself, is holy. That's a Christian concept. We do not believe in ascetic life, a lifestyle. That's not how we believe that a person should not have intimate relations. A person should not have any wine. A person should not enjoy life. You should always constantly be, masochistically beating yourself up, enjoying the pain, and telling yourself that that's kapara. Judaism doesn't believe in that. It believes in elevating the physical. So therefore, this Nazir, when he made wine asur on himself, that was taking one of the great pleasures of this world and swearing off that wine. Therefore, he requires a korban hatat. So therefore, what the Gemara is communicating over here is then that Shemuel, who says that a person who fasts, who is not obligated to do so, he made a sin, because what'd you do? You stopped yourself from eating. Who told you to do that? The Torah and God believed that this world was there not only to exist and for you to deprive yourself of it, but rather to take part in it, to enjoy it, and to elevate it with the beracha and with the purpose of Kiddusha. Rabbi Elazar continues. We have a kal vachomer. What's a kal vachomer? Kal vachomer is a intellectual exercise. If, let's say, I told you that you could go to a shawarma store and a shawarma comes with a soda, you could understand that if a $10 shawarma comes with a soda, much more so, a $200 steak comes with a soda. You would be wrong. But that would be the example of a kal vachomer. A kal vachomer would be if this is included in something light. If I tell you a benoni, a middle of the road guy, wouldn't steal from someone, then you know that a tzaddik for sure wouldn't steal from someone. Kal vachomer means if that is the case in the light, how much more so is that a case in the chomer, in the heavy? And the Gemara continues and says, if someone only deprived himself of wine, is considered a sinner and therefore needs a korban chatat, the sacrifice that was brought for someone who did a sin. Someone who's fasting and he's not letting himself eat anything whatsoever. How much more so? So Shmuel would learn with the method of kal vachomer from the opinion of Rabbi Elazar HaKapar, that a choteh, that a person who fasts, who has no obligation to do so, is considered a sinner. The Gemara then continues. Rabbi Elazar says, Nikra kadosh. This Nazir, you're calling him a sinner. I see you're a sinner, and I raise you a saint. Nikra kadosh. He's called holy. Shneimar, as the pasuk says, kadosh yiyeh. He's going to be holy. Gadel pera se'arosho. He grows the hair on his head, he grows it to be long. So you see that he holds the exact opposite of the opinion of Rabbi Elazar HaKapar. And he also now has to prove his point. He says, if this person who only withheld himself from one thing, i.e. giving himself drinking wine, nikra kadosh, is called holy. Someone who holds himself back from everything, i.e. if he fasts in order to achieve kapara for the people to bring the rain, how much more so is he kadosh? Since the Torah calls a Nazir kadosh, it must be that he's not considered a choteh. Okay? Now, if that's the case, we're now left in some ways with a little bit of a difficulty. So Shmuel called the guy a sinner. How could it be that he's calling him a sinner if the Torah calls him a kadosh? Shmuel haikri kadosh. He's called kadosh. How could it be? The Gemara says, "Hahu agidul perakai." The pasuk says kadosh yihye because he refrains from cutting his hair. And what is it talking about? It's not talking about him. It's talking about the hair, because at the end of the time that he grows this hair for the time of being a Nazir, the hair itself is part of the process of the korban of the Nazir. So therefore, the hair is holy. It's not talking about him. The Gemara says, okay, now let's go according to the other opinion. Rabbi Elazar, who says that the guy is considered kadosh, hanikra choteh. The Torah calls him a sinner. How does the Torah call him a sinner? Because it says that he needs to bring a korban chatat. Answers the Gemara, who the saiv nafsheh. That is talking about a scenario where the person actually made himself tameh by coming into contact with a dead body. And since it doesn't mean that he needs to bring the korban because he stopped himself from drinking wine, it means he needs to bring the korban because he did not withhold himself from becoming impure from contact with the dead body. So therefore, that's why he brings the korban. Umi amar Rabbi Elazar hachi. And how do we know? And why does this opinion follow this way? Vehamar Rabbi Elazar. But didn't Rabbi Elazar also say, Le'olam yamod adam atzmo, a person should also always consider himself ki'ilu kadosh sharui betoch me'av, as if there's holiness, there's spirituality that dwells within him. Shine'emar, like the pasuk says, B'kirbecha kadosh v'lo abo be'ir. Inside of you is holy, and I will not come into the city. Okay, so if that's the case, so you see that Rabbi Elazar held that the inside of a person is holy, and if that's the case, how could it be that he holds that fasting is considered a special thing? If the insides of a person are holy, surely the person needs to support that. with food. He needs to be able to sustain that holiness. And if that's the case, how could he simultaneously hold that fasting is considered a davar shebekdusha? The Gemara answers, lo kasha. It's not a question. In one case, when one is fasting, that's a good thing. Why? Because he knows himself that it's not going to hurt. It's not going to hurt his system. He's not the type of person that fasting does anything to his innards. But there's some people that when they fast, it causes them tons of problems inside, and their innards are suffering, and therefore he's doing something bad to something which is called kadosh. So intermittent fasting, where people feel great when they do that, they would fall under the category of hadimatzi l'tzeurei nafsheh. They're able to do it, and it doesn't hurt them. Actually, they feel great. They feel better with something like that. So the Gemara would not be referring to such a case. Rish Lakish continues and says as follows: Nikra Chasid, a person who fasts for the needs of the community, he's called a righteous person. Shneimar Gomel Nafsho Ish Chased. A person, Gomel could mean that someone gives tzedakah, like Gomel Hasadim Tovim. But Gomel could also mean that a person is pulling away from something. Like it says when the child grew up, Vayigamal, and he was weaned away from his mother's food. So the word Gomel Nafsho means someone who pulls his soul away from something. Ish Hased. He's considered to be a person who's full of kindness, who's full of piousness. And if that's the case, Ve'ocher She'ero. And on the other hand, a person who destroys his own skin, his own bones, that person is considered cruel. So what are we talking about when we say a person who destroys his own flesh? I'd imagine that Rish Lakish would explain the second part of that pasuk, right, as a person who's ruining his own body. Okay? So like the second explanation in the Gemara that we just read. So when a person is fasting, he's considered a pious man if it doesn't destroy his body. But a person who fasts and it hurts his body, he's considered an achzar, he's considered a cruel person. Not wild. So the Gemara says, you're doing something immoral to yourself. If a person is, as an example, fasting for the sake of looks or something else other than a pious reason. A person is fasting and they're hurting themselves, but they have some other person. You're not allowed to do that. You're considered cruel. If you're cruel for hurting someone else, how much more so are you considered cruel and achzar for hurting yourself?
It's as if the body doesn't belong to you.
Sorry?
It's as if the body doesn't belong to you.
It's exactly as if the body doesn't belong. Exactly. Which is also part of the reason why Judaism doesn't believe that a person's allowed to put a tattoo on his body. It's not your body to be able to mess around with. You have to return it in its pristine state as best as you can to HaKadosh Baruch Hu at the end of your days. The Gemara then continues. Let's finish with this last piece, and that will be our session for tonight. Amar Rav Sheshet. Rav Sheshet taught, Hai bar be'rav diativ b'ta'anita. Let's say you have bar be'rav means a young person, like bar mitzvah. Bei means the house of Rav, of a rabbi. So the young of the house of the rabbi means the students of the yeshiva. Diativ b'ta'anita, who fasts. Lechol kalba l'sheruteh. Let a dog come and eat his food. Why? Why do you think?
It's sarcastic.
Sorry?
Be fasting.
Why shouldn't they be fasting?
Oh, it's not a legit fast.
Right.
Why? Why is his fast not legitimate?
Did we learn because if you're not considered a Talmid, then only the Talmid fasts, and if you consider yourself a Talmid and you didn't fast beforehand?
Over here, but it's not telling you what you are and what you aren't. It's just saying a student, a yeshiva student.
Maybe because he wasn't supposed to fast. It wasn't.
Or they're young.
It wasn't. Not perpetrator. What's the right word? It wasn't. It wasn't a public fast day. He wasn't supposed to do it.
He needs nutrition to live.
So then again, why are we delineating specifically a yeshiva student then?
Oh, I like what you said.
Because he needs nutrition to better understand Torah. If he's
excellent.
Fasting, he's not going to understand
So if you look at Chamuvadia brings this halacha lema'aseh. There are times when a person fasts Like if you drop, if a person drops the tefillin, right? A person has a bad dream. So we've mentioned this halakha in the morning a few times.
Yeah.
That if a person is a Torah scholar, it's not up to you to fast. Your job is sit and study Torah. Now you're going to come, you feel so holy because you're fasting, but you're listless. You can't move. You know who else Chamovadia doesn't allow to fast? Obviously on a fast day, you're allowed to fast. You have an obligation. But if a person wants to fast because of a bad dream, wants to fast because of a talit, because he dropped tefillin, wants to fast because he was in the room when they dropped the Sefer Torah. He says, a teacher, if you have a teacher who teaches students Torah in school, he says, you're coming to school and you're teaching Torah and you're weak. Your students, they don't deserve to have the weaker version of you.
Wow.
Not allowed to fast. Kamvai says, give tzedakah instead.
Not allowed to fast on fast days.
No, on fast days, you're allowed to fast.
Oh,
But not just because.
Because that's everybody has the obligation.
I got it.
But on days that a person is accepting on himself a private fast, or because someone dropped the Sefer Torah and he was there at the time, or because he had a bad dream and he wants to get that kapara, get that kapara and the merit of the Torah that you taught your students. Okay, so the Gemara, it disrespects this is his fast offering, and the Gemara says, oh, you know what? Let's take his meal, feed it to the dogs. It's a way of us saying we don't appreciate. We don't appreciate your fasting over here. Gemara continues. Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba. Rabbi Yirmiyah, the son of Abba, said, "En ta'anit tzibur beBavel." There is no ta'anit tzibur. There's no fast, a public fast beBavel. Ela Tisha B'Av bilvad. The only fast that they had in Bavel was only for Tisha B'Av. What in the world does that mean? So let's look at the Gemara. Let's look at Rashi. Rashi says on the side. You see it over there? En ta'anit tzibur beBavel le'inyan isurei chumrei ta'anit. Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah lemilteh. שהיו נוהגים בו כאין אבלות, שהיו אוכלים מבעוד יום ואסורים בנעילת הסנדל אל שבבת. So he says, it doesn't mean that there was no ta'anit. Of course they had ta'aniyot. It just means that the stricter kind of a ta'anit, they only had on Tisha B'Av. They didn't fast with all the other strictness of Tisha B'Av, of the 5 things, not wearing shoes, not having intimate relations, not doing all those, not washing yourself. That they only did on Tisha B'Av. Now, this is a very interesting thing over here. So what is the Gemara actually communicating? Because we also only do that on Tisha B'Av and Yom Kippur, obviously. So what is the Gemara over here saying that in Bavel that was the case?
It didn't even mention Yom Kippur. It just said...
Because we don't count Yom Kippur as a fast day. Okay?
The English explanations say that because Babel didn't have droughts.
Oh, where'd they get that from? Tosafot. Look at Tosafot one-liner. En ta'anit tzibur b'Bavel shabbat pirush shaya lahem habeg shamim. They had a lot of rain. So it doesn't mean that they didn't do this. It means that they never had a need to do this. Yeah. If you remember, what do we say about Bavel? Bavel is low. So Bavel was all the valleys. So since Bavel was a low-lying land, they got all the water from the high countries around it. It became like the fertile area, the fertile crescent. Since that's the case, so Bavel didn't have a need to do that. Rashi is not going with the same opinion as Tosafot. Because Rashi, what did he do? He didn't change the nature of the Ta'anit. He changed what was Asur on the Ta'anit. But the question, therefore, is, what does Rashi actually mean? How does Rashi understand the statement of the Gemara? That's always the case. We always only have the strictest element of a ta'anit only on Tisha B'Av and not on the other fasts. So what does he mean to say? Yeah? So I think I have another explanation. My explanation is that there was a stricter form of avelut surrounding other days, other fast days, in Eretz Israel. Because remember, the majority of the fast days revolve around what? The structure of the Beit HaMikdash. I'm talking about the decreed fast days. Right? They revolve around that. And if that's the case, right? So there was perhaps in Eretz Israel, there was a stricter adherence to the nature of the Ta'anit of Tisha B'Av on the other days too, because they were closer to the reason why you were fasting. So in such a place, it was considered an even bigger tragedy, because Shavas Har B'Tammuz, Asara b'tevet. All of those were about the destruction that happened in Israel. So in the diaspora, we have a watered-down version of the Taanit. Last explanation that I want to give on this before we move on is as Rashi explained, it's referring to the more strict guidelines of what's it called of a declaring a fast. But what Rashi is communicating is that we did not allow in Bavel the rabbis to institute the stricter level of fast that has also these other strict stringencies, either because the people themselves were not cut out for it, but I have an alternate reason as well that I think with regards to refraining from intimacy, when a person's on a higher level, refraining from intimacy can bring extra elements of Kiddusha. But when a person's on a lower level and they have to refrain from that intimacy, sometimes that actually causes more problems than good. So maybe the Gemara was saying that in Bavel, we can't institute those higher level stringencies because the people are not on the level where that will result in something. But that's, again, we'll have to come back to that a little bit later. Okay, let's finish off the Gemara. Gemara says, Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba amar Reish Lakish. Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba said in the name of Reish Lakish, En Talmid Chacham Rashai L'Shev B'Ta'anit Nesh Ma'ed Melechet Shamayim. Talmid Chacham is not allowed to fast, as we explained, on days that are not designated as the fast days he's supposed to. Why? Shemima'et melechet shamayim. Similar to what we learned earlier, because he is minimizing the work of heaven by the fact that he is fasting and he's in a weaker state. And therefore, unless he's obligated to do so, he's not allowed to choose to do so of his own volition. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen.